Okay, the time is now 7:04. I'm calling to order and reconvening the regular Board of Education meeting for Monday, November 13th, 2017. Jackie, can you call the roll, please?
Mr. Rasak.
Here.
Mr. Karubas.
Here.
Ms. Peel.
Here.
Ms. Donahue.
Here.
Mr. Rising.
Here.
Ms. Price.
Here.
Ms. Deming.
Here.
Mr. Rising, could you lead us in the pledge?
Sure.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We now move to our board salutes. We have one, and it's a good one.
They're all good.
Yes?
I guess I get the honor of doing this one, only one tonight. The board salutes Dr. Karen Sullivan on recently being named the 2017 recipient of the Harder Family Distinction of Honor Award by community partner 360 Youth Services. Dr. Sullivan was recognized for her unwavering commitment to youth and significant engagement in providing District 204 students with the necessary social and emotional skills development through Back on Track program. Congratulations, Dr. Sullivan.
Good job.
I share that with the board.
Now we're moving to our student representative report. Today we have Ms. Kaitlyn Backe from Neuqua Valley High School. Hi, Kaitlyn.
Hello. Hello, I'm Kaitlyn Backe, and I will be giving you some updates of what Neuqua has been up to lately. Recently, our cheer team started Cheer with Peer, which is when students from Best Buddies were invited to attend 2 practices with the Neuqua cheerleaders and then join them on the football field at the Neuqua versus Naperville North football game. The volleyball team raised and donated $9,500 to the Side Out Foundation with help from their annual Pink Out game and fundraiser. On October 5th, 35 Nitro-Slovakian students came to Neuqua for homestays, visits to our school, and excursions in the area. This was a part of the Naperville Sister Cities Commission. This was the 25th anniversary of the partnership with Nitra. What a great way to celebrate. Our theater department put on a fantastic production of Little Red Robin Hood for our annual children's show. We had PSAT and NMSQT testing for freshmen, sophomores, and juniors on October 11th. On October 13th, all of our students took an advocacy survey about self-advocacy, and it gave us students a chance to express their needs and aspirations. This is a part of our partnership with Equal Opportunity Schools. I was a part of EOS last year and was recruited to challenge myself in an AP class this year. Today, I am in AP English 3, and surprisingly, I love it. It's my favorite class. The class challenges me and helps me improve in my reading, writing, and speaking skills. My current success is thanks to the EOS program and various motivational teachers along the way. Our homecoming week was full of great activities, including a school bonfire, Neuqua Knows It Can Dance, our first Powder Puff football game, a pep rally, and we finished off with our homecoming dance on October 14th. To honor supporting a healthy lifestyle, we celebrated Red Ribbon Week, October 23rd through October 27th. The Neuqua Marching Band finished first at the University of Illinois Class 6A band competition last week. Congratulations to our very own principal, Dr. McBride, for being one of 8 principals across the nation to be awarded the Bell Award, as well as traveling to Washington, D.C. with Dr. Sullivan to receive our National Blue Ribbon School of Excellency Award. 11 Neuqua athletes attended the National Letter of Intent signing ceremony for intercollegiate athletes. Our annual Veterans Honor Ceremony was on November 9th and helped us honor our fellow Wildcats now serving. Neuqua's SAT average has been placed in the top 10 in Illinois, as well as the highest percentage of meeting and exceeding state standards on the SAT in DuPage County. Great job, Wildcats. We would like to invite all of our board members and Dr. Sullivan to our annual Red Carpet Rally, where we will recognize state and national award winners. This will be Tuesday, November 21st at 11 a.m. Hope to see you all there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kaitlyn. We've been noticing the high school students have been bringing their Chromebooks up here, so that's good use of district money there. It's now time for public comment for non-agenda items. If you are here to speak to an agenda item, that comment will be taken immediately prior to that item. 30 minutes is allowed for public comment, and each person is limited to 3 minutes. When addressing the board, we ask that you respect the confidentiality and safety of our students and school district personnel. We also ask that those addressing the board be cognizant that this is an open meeting and is available to all age groups, and as such, ask that you consider who the audience members are this evening and keep the comments age appropriate. Public comment represents the voice and opinion of the speaker. There will be no feedback from board members during this meeting, but follow-up will be provided by an administrator as appropriate. Our first speaker, I think, is Don Rabel.
Thank you, sir. And thank you for pronouncing my name correctly. I'm shocking. I'm shocked. I am Don Rabel, and I'm just coming today simply to introduce myself. I am the director of what is a Sylvan Learning Center that we just opened up at the corner of Montgomery and Ogden Avenues. And even though there has been one here in this area before, we have an opportunity now, since we have modified our program, that I just wanted to introduce myself to you, as well as, to the school. If there's ever an opportunity or ever an interest in which you would like to partner in some regard, years ago there was a considerable partnership with Indian Prairie for tutoring services. And we do know that there are opportunities at times when you have to, you need to provide services, and we are available. That's why I'm here today, and I wanted to just simply introduce myself.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker, I'm going to say it's Maglin Barnes, but
Maryland.
is it Marilyn? Marilyn Barnes.
What is it?
You all right? Is Marilyn here?
Oh, you're
Test scores?
Oh, okay. Should we do those during that
Good,
time? Yeah.
correct them. That's good.
Thank you for helping me. So we are now moving to Superintendent Report and our consent agenda. Dr. Sullivan?
Okay, you ready? Okay, so it's hard to believe that we're into the second quarter of the school year already, and in the midst of our parent-teacher conferences, some of which are happening right this moment. Last week, our school celebrated Veterans Day with various assemblies and activities. I know that the ones that I was able to attend were very moving and well done. I know that Mr. Razak was on the circuit. I saw him at several, so I hope that others, if you ever have the opportunity to attend those in the future, that you'll do so. I do want to remind everyone that tomorrow night is our Engage 204 community meeting. We will be at Still Middle School from 7 to 9 p.m. I will be giving a short presentation on the state of the district, and then participants will be asked to work in small groups to provide some input and feedback. And these are very important meetings that will help shape the future of our school district, so that we hope that we see all of you there at Still. Wednesday, November 15th is School Board Members Day in Illinois, and I want to take this time to thank our Indian Prairie School Board members for their service to the district and to the community. Being a school board member requires significant commitment of time and energy and a relentless dedication to public education, hence your gift. So I'm sure that most of you, I think that commitment to public education is especially important in today's world. I'm sure most of you had no idea what you were getting into when you signed up for this volunteer position. And I know that there are days that you might question just a little bit why you signed up on for this job. So I want to share a short video that I hope will clarify why you do what you do. Your attention here.
Because we are committed to the children of this country. And we believe that every single child should have the opportunity to reach their potential. We understand that education is the foundation of our democracy. and that an educated public is an informed public. It is my dream that we as a society will recognize the transformative power of great public education. Public schools can be the great equalizer. Regardless of poverty, ethnicity, or situation in life, an effective teacher and supportive school can open up the world for all students. Honestly, it's the best, hardest, most rewarding, most emotional, most frustrating, and the most inspiring job anyone could ever do. We're producing incredible engineers, IT techs, authors, doctors, and more. We have waiting lists for students from other countries to come to America just so they can experience a solid American education. My sincere hope is that public education will be viewed and supported as an investment in our children's future and our country's future. The knowledge that my decisions play an important role in the future of many children is what motivates me. And I'm humbled to be able to play a small role in helping them succeed in school and beyond. We do this job to see our students grow, succeed, and overcome. To see the smiles on seniors' faces as they walk across the stage to be handed their diploma. We show up for our students because education is foundational to solving the world's issues. Because strong public schools transform lives.
So I don't know if you've seen that. That's from your National School Board Association.
Seen that.
Haven't seen it?
No.
No? Okay. So we know that from research that highly effective and efficient school boards that focus on the things that matter have a positive impact on student achievement in the district. And I'm proud to work for a group of volunteers that have committed to be that kind of board. District 4's students, family, and staff are very fortunate to have you leading this great district. And we thank you for your service, and we're glad that you share our love of public education. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the T-shirt.
To share your t-shirt.
Still waiting for that paycheck. That's good.
Yeah, we'll
Show off our
Yeah,
T-shirt.
show that one.
It's perfect. Cool T-shirts.
Oh, nice.
You can wear it Sunday.
Yeah.
Okay, we are now moving to our consent agenda. I need a motion that we approve consent agenda items D through J.
I move that the Board of Education approve consent agenda items D through J as presented.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. Jackie, will you call the roll?
Mr. Carubus?
Yes.
Ms. Price?
Yes.
Ms. Deming?
Aye.
Mr. Rasak?
Aye.
Ms. Peel?
Aye.
Ms. Donahue?
Aye.
Mr. Rising?
Aye.
Motion passes. We're now going to our action items. Our first one is the approval of the tentative 2017 tax levy. Do I have a motion?
I will make a motion for the approval of the tentative 2017 tax levy as presented.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. String?
Good evening, board members. Tonight, we take the first step in the process that will ultimately result in the extension of our property taxes for the fiscal year 2018-19 school year. The context of this levy request is that we've got a new and completely, not completely known education funding system that was passed into law by the state of Illinois. The state continues to threaten school districts with their finances with pension cost shift and freezes to property taxes. Most recently, there was some legislation that would have impacted this levy and cost the district $5.3 million if it had gone through. Of our three revenue systems, the federal, the state, and the local, our local revenue is the only one that we can count on consistently and the only revenue source that's supplied any type of increase over the years. As you're aware, we operate very efficiently as a school district. Our operating expenditure per pupil is lower than the state and national average and 25% lower than other DuPage County unit school district averages. Recently, the Board of Education refunded bonds at a lower interest rate, saving taxpayers $10.4 million. And over the last 4 years, you've refunded bonds, saving taxpayers more than $25 million. The Illinois School Code gives the authority of the Board of Education to levy taxes on real property within the school district to support its public schools. It's an annual process that must be completed before the end of December. Furthermore, the Truth in Taxation Act provides that any tentative levy that exceeds 105% of the previous extension requires a public notice and a hearing to be needed for the official levy can be adopted. Since our levy request represents less than 5%, we are not subject to the Truth in Taxation Act this year. We still intend to follow that intent in an effort to be transparent. Therefore, 20 days prior to the adoption of the levy resolution, the board must estimate and announce a tentative levy for the amount of money that they deem necessary to be raised from property taxes. It is this tentative levy that we are asking the board to approve tonight. We are recommending that the board set a tentative levy in the amount of $292,059,166, which includes our bond and interest levy. I'd like to note this levy request is just a request. It's not what we're really going to receive. While this represents a 3.9% increase over this 2016 levy extension, the district is subject to the tax cap legislation, and we will not receive 3.9% in an increase. The fact is, depending upon the amount of new property, the district should receive and experience a 3.1% increase in its final extension. This levy request calls for a bond and interest tax levy of $27,181,556. This estimated ending bond interest levy is in accordance with our bonded debt structure, and we have 10 more years to pay off our schools before we're complete with that. Over the 26 years of the property tax cap, has faithfully limited property taxes increases in the collar counties to the Consumer Price Index, and it continues to do so. The Consumer Price Index used for this tax year is 2.1%. The district, therefore, will only receive 2.1% increase plus the amount of new growth. So existing homes will see a 2.1% increase to the taxes. With the tax cap, CPI has become the critical factor, not the tax rate. The rate is simply raised or lowered by the formula CPI. Tax rates this year will drop as property values have increased in both Will and DuPage counties. DuPage County EAVs, or property values, have increased by 5.6%. Will County EAVs, or property values, have increased by 2.2%. For the 2017 taxes, the average homeowner should increase their taxes by 2.1%. To a $300,000 house, it's $49.50. The levy is set to an amount that ensures that there will be able to access taxes of new property. Therefore, it is based on the fiscal year 2019 budget. As I mentioned earlier, current projections for the 2019 budget suggest a tight budget, which includes the taxes being levied tonight. The estimate increase in property taxes is $8.1 million, of which $2.7 million will come from new property. Although we are not subject to the Truth in Taxation Act this year, we still intend to follow that procedure with a final adoption in December. The hearing will begin on the December 11th board meeting. Later in that agenda, we will ask the board for the final approval. So at this time, the administration recommends that the board approve the 2017 levy as presented.
Questions? No questions. With that, Jackie, can you call the roll?
Mr. Rising?
Aye.
Ms. Demming?
Aye.
Mr. Karubas?
Yes.
Ms. Donahue?
Aye.
Ms. Price?
Aye.
Mr. Rasak?
Aye.
Ms. Peel?
Aye.
Okay, we're moving to our next agenda item, which is approval of policies for first reading. Why don't we go over those policies and then we can do a motion?
Sure.
Oh, yeah, motion passed on the levy, thank you.
Great. Bringing three policies for approval for first reading tonight. The first one, actually the first and second one, 450 and 455. One is payment procedures and one is use of credit and procurement cards. The review of this and suggested changes came from a collaborative effort from Mr. Strang as well as our attorney Jack Canna as they reviewed it to make sure it met legal requirements, but also wanting to make sure that it could reflect practices in the district or practices that would make sense for our district. So the first one is payment procedures. You'll see some slight changes that were outlined for you. That is under 450. In 455, there were a little bit more changes. If this one does get approved, you would see that there would be a schedule that would want to be proposed to the board to be set forth for board approval about limits on procurement cards. Those were the main changes. That's in 3 and 4. And then finally, we have 7275. There was actually a suggestion as an optional suggestion that was presented by press, but it said to consult the board attorney. So we did work with our attorney for the changes on this one, and that relates to orders to forego life-sustaining treatment. It was really about adding clarity and the team that needs to be involved in that process. Those are the changes for the three.
Any questions, comments?
Probably should make a motion before we have discussion, shouldn't we?
Okay, Mark.
Approval of, I'd like to make a motion for the approval of policies for first reading, 4:50, 4:55, and 7:275.
I do have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Questions?
I do have actually one question. The school nurse that was number, 5, that was crossed out there. Why was that recommended? Is it because we've got the other medical providers or medical professionals?
Yeah, child's health care provider. Well, you have up there as determined by the superintendent or designee.
Right.
Because we can have say of who, which part of the school team would be part of that already, and that's why my understanding was it was redundant to keep that language there.
Well, that's why I question it, because it also would fall under medical professionals, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think the language here was to invite other people outside of that team.
Okay.
Any other questions? Jackie, can you call the roll?
Mr. Rising?
Aye.
Ms. Price?
Aye.
Ms. Donahue?
Aye.
Ms. Peel?
Aye.
Mr. Rasak?
Aye.
Mr. Karubas?
Yes.
Ms. Deming? Aye.
Moving to, motion passes. We're now moving to our next agenda item, which is the approval of the Board of Education Annual Conference estimated travel expenses. That is actually new state law that came into being about a year ago. It's also now part of our board policy. So in order to be transparent, I ask for a motion.
I move that the Board of Education approve the Board of Education IASB, IASA, IASBO 2017 Annual Conference estimated travel expenses as presented.
Second?
I have a motion and a second. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, Jackie, you please call the roll.
Ms. Price?
Aye.
Mr. Karubas?
Yes.
Ms. Deming?
Aye.
Mr. Reising?
Aye.
Ms. Peel?
Aye.
Ms. Donahue?
Aye.
Mr. Rasak?
Aye, motion passes. Now moving to the approval of the Illinois Association of School Board Resolutions and Position Statements. Mr. Rising and I will attempt to go through that process. Mark, do you want to start, and then we'll have maybe two motions or three?
As per our last meeting, we discussed these. There were no major questions that came out of that I need to really make public. And I think we are ready to vote on the 8 resolutions. In my discussion, my individual discussions with board members, I heard that there may be some discussion on resolution number 8, and we might want some discussion around that. But from discussing with board members, resolution 1 through 7, unless somebody wants to discuss any individual ones of those resolutions 1 through 7, I'd like to vote on those all at once in support of IASB Resolution Committee, their recommendation. So unless somebody wanted to discuss resolution 1 through 7, I will make a motion to approve 1 through 7 altogether. Does anybody want to discuss 1 through 7? Okay.
Second, do we need a second?
Well, I'll make the motion. The motion,
Sorry.
well, no, the motion is to be able to vote on resolution 1 through 7 at once, I guess, yes.
So we have a motion, we have a second.
I think Jackie might need a motion. The
And-
motion is to approve the IASB.
Well, it's
recommended-
first to vote on 1 through 7 at the same time.
Yes.
You good, Jackie?
I'm doing it right now. I'll tell you what you said in a minute.
And then it'll be to,
To approve the rest of them. This will work fine. Go ahead. That's Mark, and we need,
Lori, I think.
And Lori seconded.
Lori seconded. Thank you.
Any discussion? Jackie, can you call the roll?
Mr. Reising?
Aye.
Ms. Price?
Aye.
Mr. Rasak?
Aye.
Ms. Peel?
Aye.
Ms. Donahue?
Aye.
Ms. Deming? Aye. Mr. Karubas?
Yes.
Okay, now, my motion will be to support resolution 1 through 7 as recommended by the IASB Resolution Committee. So that means we are taking the position that the IASB committee took.
Second.
Do we have a motion and a second? Jackie, how you doing?
What did we just do?
So the first motion he did was basically to vote 1 through 7 as like a slate. And now we're actually voting on 1 through 7. Do we support what IASB says, or we do not support what they say as a slate?
Just trying to be kosher.
I think Mark
You're the attorney, you should know the Robert's
Mark-
rules.
I thought we did it. I just, okay.
made the motion to support.
To support 1 through 7, seconded by
second.
Kathy.
Yes, okay.
I'm just asking Jackie, does she have that?
Oh, okay. I thought you were asking. that.
I think so. So the motion is to approve the IASB resolution position statements 1 through 7, supporting the IASB resolution committee recommendations.
That's correct. And Jackie, can you call the roll?
Probably. Hold on. Okay, that was Mark, correct?
Yes.
Mr. Rising.
And Kathy.
And Kathy? Okay, thanks. Okay, Mr. Rising.
Aye.
Ms. Peel?
Aye.
Mr. Karubas?
Yes.
Ms. Demming? Aye. Ms. Price?
Aye.
Ms. Donahue?
Aye.
Mr. Rasak?
Aye. One more to go, Mark.
Okay,
Eight.
how should we handle this one? Okay. Well, can we have discussion before we?
Make a motion.
No, we need a motion.
Well, my motion will be to oppose IASB's recommendation for resolution number 8.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Discussion.
I don't know if you guys remember when we previously talked last school board meeting.
Wait,
Oh.
so the recommendation is the opposite of what it says in the pamphlet, right?
Yeah.
That's, okay.
Yeah, so the IASB resolution committee was to do adopt, and I made the motion that we oppose their recommendation. We had discussed at our last meeting that, and heard some input from administration as well, that to go above and beyond what is deemed necessary as per school code section 10-20:21. This would get into multiple bidding of contracts that, to me, goes outside of the scope of what our requirements are by law. And I just felt that that was overburdening on a district our size.
We received an amendment to this packet from IASB that did not, or did or did not impact this recommendation? Did it change this one?
I wasn't
The
familiar.
recommendation's the opposite of what's in the packet.
So,
Is the recommendation here was to approve it, right?
so the packet says do adopt,
Do adopt.
and the recommendation is do not adopt.
No, no.
No.
The packet says do not adopt. The recommendation by the committee was to adopt.
Wait,
And I think you're talking about the correction that needed to be made, that Mark told us about last meeting?
Yeah.
That was on number 7.
that was on number 7.
Oh, I'm
Perfect.
sorry.
Thank you.
It was a typo.
You're right. Never mind, sorry.
So this, the committee still stands by their do adopt recommendation. Mark has made the motion to not support that.
Yeah, I oppose it. I mean, I don't think it's good practice.
And can you expound on that?
Well, I think there's certain services that you need to have, you need to be able to pick, that aren't just good for the lowest, most responsible bidder. So there are certain services, especially, and it's, part of it is in the code. And so this is asking for a position from the IASB that would be a further restriction on schools and their ability to contract that's not set forth in the law. So should our school board association advocate for further restrictions on our ability and the ability of other local school districts to contract for these services? I don't think that's in our interest or any other school board's interest, so.
Thank you.
Well, and as Karen also mentioned, the things that we would always continue to go out to bid for would be services that, asphalt or lighting or roofing and, certain things that are apples to apples across the board. You're going to get pretty much the same product. Yes, we absolutely, our fiduciary responsibility to our taxpayers is to get the lowest bid for those certain things. But on other things, such as software, for instance, where we may have special circumstances that we require to get different services within that software, and that's just one example of, numerous. I think you're not talking apples to apples, and It's going to get pretty ugly.
And let's recognize the difference between a bid and a request for a proposal, right?
Yep,
So say
that's
that
important.
These are, okay.
Yep.
Any other comments? Jackie, call the roll.
Mr. Reising?
Aye.
Mr. Carubus?
Yes.
Ms. Donahue?
Aye.
Ms. Price?
Aye.
Ms. Deming?
Aye.
Ms. Peel?
Aye.
Mr. Rasak?
Aye. Motion passes. It is now time for public comment for an agenda item. Again, we are following our same rules. Each person is limited to 3 minutes when addressing the board. Again, we ask that you respect the confidentiality and safety of our students and school district personnel. Again, public comment represents the voice and opinion of the speaker. Marilyn Barnes.
Good evening. My name is Marilyn Barnes, as you said, and I have lived in District 204 for 25 years. I have a junior at Mattia and a college sophomore who is a dual major in early childhood education and psychology and a graduate of Mattia. One of the 5 social determinants of health is education, encompassing early childhood education and development, enrollment in higher education, high school graduation, and language and literacy. In the ebook, 8 Great Ways to Close the Achievement Gap, provides proven methods for bridging that gap. From my vantage point as a parent of a high schooler and an interested citizen, I experienced District 204 uses evidence-based instruction, has a rigorous curriculum, is introducing supplemental instruction, and monitors progress, yet the needle is not moving as it applies to test scores. Perhaps what is missing is motivating and engaging the impacted students, meeting them where they are and not judging them for it, deepening the diversity and equity professional development instead of the superficial check the box, and linking home and school using flexible methods versus the one-size-fits-all approach. When a specific demographic of students is consistently educationally marginalized as reflected in the test scores presented year after year, when there is talk and meeting upon meeting upon meeting with limited action, when Band-Aids are applied to this gap, this gaping wound of inequity, some might call it negligence by the district, some might call it perpetuation of institutionalized racism by the district, and some might call it just plain disrespect for these children. Based upon this history of disparity within the district, I have questions. What does the district stand for? Is it equity for all students or silent segregation? Will the district take a stand driving and pushing towards equity as if a child's life depended on it? Or will it wait and see how it goes and take that approach because those parents aren't engaged anyway? All children are created equal regardless of their race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, ability, socioeconomic status, or religion. And educationally, they deserve to be treated that way. Thank you.
Thank you. And our next speaker is Andrea Collier. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. Andrea Collier, or AJ, if you prefer, with Pages. I am here to highlight the achievement gap for African Americans again. But first I want to thank you for sharing all the data this year. There's a lot of data out there on the website, a lot of data. I'm a big fan of data, and it was very exciting to see the data lab. So that was very cool. The data lab was external comparisons, though, so comparing it to all of the external districts. But there were lots and lots of files for the individual schools, so that was exciting. And again, I'm a big fan. Data is what it is. Data doesn't lie. And we can certainly choose to highlight certain things about data. And what I noticed this year is that we've chosen to highlight the achievement gap based on income levels this year in the presentation that you'll see tonight. And that is very important too. That's very, very important because we do have to educate all of our children. But let's not lose sight of the disparity that still exists for African Americans. It's still there. It's still there. And I'm aware that some suggest that there may be a correlation. I'm not sure. But here's what I do see. When I looked at all of that data out there, I just took a couple examples. So if we just consider Neuqua, who is the most affluent among us, and just look at some of the feeder schools, what I saw was that Gregory, at the 6th grade level, just a couple examples. Gregory at the 6th grade level, Gregory has 84% of African Americans that do not meet the expectations in math, but 54% that do not meet, that are economically disadvantaged. So 84% African American, 54% economically disadvantaged. And then one other example, it's a lot, I didn't get through all of them, but just one other one, Scullin, which I'm aware is split. At the 8th grade level, 77% did not meet standards in math, but 51% economically disadvantaged. So they're 77, 51. So in other words, it's not one-to-one. You know, there's something still there in terms of a disparity and a gap for African Americans. And so I think there's still yet a lot of work to do. And again, I'm aware that that was just 2 data points, but my point is that I think it does warrant further review. So I'm encouraged, though, by a lot of the conversations that are happening, and I hope that we can turn all of our conversations and discussions into action, because we can turn this around. I believe that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now our discussion and our report.
Good evening. We'd like to, on behalf of Charles Sprandl, our Executive Director of Research and Assessment.
Can you get
a
a mic?
Good evening. Thank you on behalf of Charles Sprandl, our Executive Director for Research and Assessment, and myself. I want to thank the board for the opportunity to speak with you tonight about our district and school report cards. The purpose of this evening is to provide an overview of the district report card, highlighting changes. As we discussed at the workshop, there's been some changes in the way that the state is reporting data, and more to come. And we'd like to present the district and school report cards to the board and to the community. Board Policy 220, which looks at the powers of the board, asks for the presentation of these report cards to parents and guardians as well as the community. And then Board Policies 615 and 6340, which are about accountability and instruction, reference both of these reporting documents. At our October workshop, we educated and talked to the board about multiple measures and looking at all different types of measures in order to look at student achievement and growth, preparing for what the future holds for the state. Tonight we're going to share with you our student achievement data in both the SAT and the PARCC scores. Again, this is one point in time for us. However, we review data, our buildings, our district administration, our teachers, and our families review data throughout the school year to make some decisions to support our students. We'd like to highlight and help you to understand some of the reporting measures used in the district report card. We'd like to share with you our achievement gap and sharing how some of these items are calculated is helpful for us in order to know how to dig deeper into finding some sources for some concerns that we may have, as well as some solutions for the future, and then talk to you about next steps in reporting. There's a lot of information in this presentation, so please feel free to ask questions along the way. So we're going to get started.
All right, this slide is just a reminder of the 3 state assessments that get folded together into our academic achievement measures. The SAT given at the high school, PARC is given in grades 3 through 8, and DLM is given to a select group of our special education students. In October, we shared with the board overall SAT results, kind of making the point that this was a new baseline, a break from the old ACT, that we had some level of confidence that our current scores were in line with what we had seen on ACT, but really we were kind of setting a new baseline to move forward. Since that time, the state has gone through a process to set cut scores to identify achievement levels for SAT. This slide shows what proportion of our students fell into each one of those 4 achievement levels, level 1 being the lowest up to level 4 being the highest. The state will further summarize that and combine the top 2 levels into an overall percent proficiency. So the state will report that 69.9% of our students were proficient in English and 67.1% were proficient in math. You may have seen, it's been in a couple of the papers, some of the conflict between college boards, college readiness benchmarks, and the state cut scores. The College Board, who produces the SAT assessment, has done studies linking performance on SAT to success in college. So their benchmark scores are designed to predict the student has a 75% chance of earning a C or better in a credit-bearing freshman college course. So their benchmark score is a predictive measure of success in college. The state board's process was centered around the Illinois Learning Standards and finding a score that demonstrated a thorough mastery of those standards. So one way to interpret what's on the screen right now would be that College Board would say that 83.6% of our students are likely to be successful in a freshman college English class. The state would say 69.9% of our students have demonstrated a thorough mastery of the state's English standards. So they're going at it from 2 different directions. In math, the cut scores actually ended up only being 10 points apart, so we see a much smaller difference in the percentage of our students that would be deemed either predicted to be successful in college or having mastered the state standards. Moving on to our PARC assessment scores. These graphs show the percentage of students in each achievement level and also highlight those top 2 levels, which the state kind of folds together into a percent proficiency. So these would indicate that according to the state at the elementary level, 52.8% of our students have mastered the English standards and 57.6% of our students have mastered the mathematics standards. We've also provided the overall Illinois results as well as the PARC Consortium results, which currently include 6 states that are listed below in the District of Columbia. And as you can see, our results compare favorably to both of those groups.
Now, I have a question there. In some states, some people use the yellow as meeting standards. Is that correct?
States have chosen that. Ohio was an example of that, and actually Ohio has stopped using PARC. So while they were using PARC, yes, they used level 3 as an indicator of proficiency. New Mexico, who is still using PARC, began using a 3, but has now shifted to using 4 and above. So again, each state is left up to how they want it. The performance levels are the same for all the states. What cut score puts a student in each performance level. How states want to interpret that is left up to each individual state.
But it's very important, because I remember you guys saying in a previous presentation that yellow area, that level 3, the top 10%, any given day, they could be in the meets area. They just maybe had a bad day that day, so they're in the yellow area. I mean, there's a lot of those border areas that fluctuate from day to day. I mean,
Correct. And part of that is, the importance of sometimes the language that we use to describe these different performance levels or what these benchmarks indicate. The state has set high cut scores that indicate for level 4 a thorough mastery of the standards. Whereas many people would interpret, if you're at the bottom end of meets, that's you're barely scraping by, and that's really not what the bottom end of that 4 category means. That's still a high-performing student at the bottom end of that 4. And as you mentioned, the top 10% or potentially even a greater proportion of that level 3 are high-performing students as well.
Which is another reason why we talk about multiple measures and digging deeper into it, because this is a data point for a student, but there's classroom data, we have our Ames Web benchmarking, we have other sources to really dig in deep and to see if there are concerns and what concerns we need to address for that student.
These graphs represent the PARCC results for our middle schools. So again, in English, the state would say 60.8% of our students have mastered the English standards at their grade level, and 55.6% of students have mastered the middle school math standards. And again, we can see that our schools compare favorably to both of those other comparison groups, not just in the percent of kids that are in those top 2 levels, but if you look at the bottom 2 levels, the relatively small number of students that are in levels 1 and 2. Illinois used to have one report card, which was a multi-page document that had pages and pages of tables of numbers. They still have that. The traditional report card is available at ISBE's website. They also, though, now have a more user-friendly version where users can interact with the data, can pull up historical data, can compare schools and districts. That's hosted on IllinoisReportCard.com. They also offer at that site a single-page at-a-glance summary of the performance of districts and schools. We also publish those single pages summaries on the district website. So there were a couple of changes to how the state is reporting academic data this year. One is the switch from reporting it by homeschool to reporting by serving school. So every student has a homeschool based on their address, their geographic location, and our attendance boundaries. They're assigned to a homeschool. Some of our students don't actually attend that homeschool, though. They're actually attending a different school in the district. In the past, the state has always reported academic data by homeschool. This year, they've switched to they're reporting it by the attending school or the serving school. So the school where the child is actually attending, that's the school that that child's data is attached to. The change that makes a bigger difference in our data is that they're now including all students in our accountability data, which on its surface would seem like that's the way it should be. But in the past, the state has always peeled out students that have attended our schools for less than a year. So the idea being this is an accountability measure. The student should have been in your school or district for at least a year before we start counting that student as part of your accountability measures. This year, the state has switched to including all students. So if a student moves into our district 2 weeks before the PARCC assessment, their results will be a part of our accountability results.
Like, how big of a population is that?
Well, it depends on, if you look at your mobility rates, it's going to hit students or districts and schools that have higher mobility rates more than those with lower mobility rates. For us, the difference, depending on the grade level and subject area, our overall proficiency rates are 1.5 to 2 points lower because of this switch.
Wow.
So it also varies from school to school. So when you look at the school reports, depending on the mobility of that school, it could affect the scores in a different manner.
Right, moving on to highlighting and trying to develop a deeper understanding of some specific pieces of the report card. The first one is the overall summary of all of our academic data. So SAT, PARCC, and DLM are all kind of wrapped up into one measure. And this is the percent of students that score at those top 2 achievement levels. And we discussed this a little bit in October, but I wanted to reemphasize just the use of terminology can be important. So 56.7% of our students overall were in those top 2 levels, which indicates they have a thorough mastery of the standards. The terminology the state has chosen to attach to that is that they are ready for the next level. I think the implication then is that 43.3% of students are not ready for the next level, which we don't believe is an accurate representation of where our students are achieving. And in fact, you can kind of contrast that number to the next number, which is the Ready for College coursework number. This number is calculated based on the previous year's graduating class. That's why when you look at the report card, it's still going to be based on ACT, because last year's graduating class was the last class that went through using the ACT. That number for us was 77% that, according to ACT's benchmark, are ready for college and career.
Is there a way for the state to improve that number? Is that a valid number? Is there a way to improve that from your perspective?
The 56.7?
Yes.
I don't know that the important thing is to change the number. It's more to change an understanding and the terminology around it. I think it's fine. They have set high bars to get that level 4. That means you're achieving at a pretty high level and have demonstrated a thorough mastery of the standards at that grade level. The problem I have is attaching that ready for next grade level terminology onto it, because that puts a spin on it that isn't an accurate description of what that number actually measures. So to me, you do one of 2 things. Either you change the benchmark so that it really is just an indicator of you're ready to move on to the next grade level, or you change the terminology to more accurately describe what the number is measuring.
Seems like in the past, before PARCC came along, we were taking the ISATs and our average scores for our schools was in the 90s percentile, and now they're in the 50s percentile. So definitely the way we're going about measuring success and the standards have caused this change in the drop, not so much our students, because our ACT scores keep climbing. So there's always been this weird thing at the high school level where we were at 75% or so in achievement, yet our kids were coming in supposedly at the 90th percentile, so that didn't make sense. And now they're going to be going in at 56th percentile, and that doesn't make sense. So just like to clarify that history.
Each school has a section of its report card labeled School Environment. That section is populated from data from the 5 Essentials Survey. Since we did not administer the 5 Essentials Survey last year, that whole section will be blank for all of our schools. We're required to give it every other year. We will be administering it this year. So the data from this year's 5 Essentials Survey will be reported out next year. We had mentioned this to the board, and I wanted to follow up with it. The state is reporting our post-secondary enrollment on our district report card as well as our high school report cards. And the numbers that are being reported right now are not the correct numbers. They're reporting that 75% of our graduates at the district level enroll in a post-secondary institution. They get those numbers directly from the National Student Clearinghouse. Those aren't numbers that we report to them. We also work with the National Student Clearinghouse to track where our students go and what they do after they graduate from high school. So the bar graph below the state's graph is what we get directly from the National Student Clearinghouse. So they're reporting to us that for this group, 86% enrolled in a college or university within the first year. So we've been working with the state and the National Student Clearinghouse to try to figure out where this disconnect has happened. We do know that the state's report is missing a significant number of our students, and that's why their number is lower. They're still working directly with the clearinghouse to isolate where that problem is happening. So we will keep the board updated as we continue to work to get that corrected.
Is it isolated just to our district, or is it happening with other districts?
In my dealings, they're treating their dealings with me as if it is specific to our district, partially because they're dealing with me and I'm representing this district. As I look at other districts' numbers, there are many that I would anticipate are smaller than they should be. So I would suspect that this is a more widespread issue than just us.
Okay.
The state reports achievement levels on state assessments by many different demographic groups. The only group that they single out to report as an achievement gap is the difference between low-income and non-low-income systems. I want to talk to for a couple of minutes about how they calculate the value that they report, because there are some pieces of that that can be problematic and are non-intuitive if you don't really know how it's calculated. What the state does is they look at the percent of students in two separate groups and what percentage of them are above a specific cut score. So this graph is showing in the lighter shading our non-low income students, how they performed on last spring's SAT, and the darker shaded bars are low income students. And the state's cut score is pictured as well. So if the state were going to calculate an achievement gap for this group, they would say 76% of the non-low income students are above that cut score, 36% of the low income students are above it. So the difference is 40. So they would report that as an achievement gap of 40. One of the issues of this way of reporting an achievement gap is that it's very dependent on where that cut score is in relation to the distribution of students. So simply changing the cut score changes the gap. So if we were, instead of using Illinois' cut score for English on the SAT, we use the College Board's cut score, the gap would be 30 instead of 40. So same students, same scores, but the gap looks very different depending on where you set that cut score. Looking at the same thing a slightly different way, the gap on our report card for Park ELA is 33, and that's based on the data that's on the slide right now. Park's cut score is at 750, and you can see the distribution of non-low income and low income students. If we were able to get all of our students to increase their achievement by 10 points, both of those distributions would shift to the right. Our gap would increase to 36. So if every student were 10 points better, the gap would actually go up. If instead of increasing by 10 points, they were all able to increase their scores by 20 points, the gap would then fall to 31.
Wait.
Thank you for the moving graph,
So-
because I didn't understand it before.
So all the groups did better, but the gap got bigger.
And then it got smaller.
Okay.
And it's just, it's an artifact of this way of reporting the achievement gap. Because what it really depends on is where that line is, where that cut score is, and how that relates to the distribution of kids. You know, as you're moving through the peak of the distribution, you're going to see large swings in the percent of students that are either on one side or the other. When you're more in the tails, it's going to make less of a difference with that group. So, you know, in this case, the last case of 20, we're moving into one of the tails of the non-low income, but moving into the peak of the low income. So it starts to do non-intuitive things.
Was there some reasoning given for changing it this way?
This is the way that they have always done it. There are potentially reasons why you might want to do it this way. One reason would be if you wanted to combine several different kinds of assessments. So if they wanted to calculate a gap that included SAT and PARC and DLM, they've got a proficiency cut score for each one, so they can calculate a percent proficient for each one. So this would let them kind of combine those different types of data into one measure. They're not doing that with it. They're only reporting achievement gap for Park. But that would be one reason why you might want to use this method.
This also, and I know I sound like a broken record, but this is also why we look at individual student growth, individual student success, because we want all of our students to get over that, to get and move over that line, and we want to support all of them to get to that spot. So the information about how it's calculated helps us to understand and to look at where are our students on that graph, both the light blue and the dark blue, to help provide systems and supports to move everybody over that,
So
over that line.
that's important to me,
Yes.
because this whole presentation has been very, very global. But then, and I know later there's some more drilling down to that individual student as we look to the future. But I think I want to reaffirm, we're drilling it down to the individual student. And just because the state is looking at the income or low income, we're disaggregating our data for all our groups. So our practice is not going to change just because that's how the state is reporting. Am I correct?
No, our practice is not going to change based on how the state is reporting, but our practice of looking at students is, we are adjusting how we look at them, which is why we presented multiple measures to you previously, to help you to understand that, you know, this Park score gives us information, but it's not all of the information. The same way as knowing how the achievement gap is calculated gives us information about how to look at it and how to dig deeper and where to go with that. So the reason for this is just an understanding of how things are calculated, just like we talked about the reasoning before about how we look at scores and why we use different measures and what those are. Now we look at how some of these scores are calculated to help better inform what we do about it.
Now, we believe it's more intuitive to look at these differences in achievement by looking at the overall averages for those groups. So this graph demonstrates achievement on last spring's SAT for several different demographic groups. The lighter shaded bars are District 204 results. The darker bars represent overall state results. And then the dotted line is the College Board's College and Career Readiness benchmark, which is provided as a reference. And there are a couple of things that I think stand out in this. One is that we do have significant differences in achievement for different groups of students. And I think another thing that stands out is that those differences in District 204 largely mirror differences that we're seeing across the state.
So one of the things that really struck out at me, and I shared this, is the fact that we're looking at African American attainment here, and because we pride ourselves, you know, on always making sure that we are always above whatever the national or state levels are. But here we see that African Americans, the average, are not even hitting that College Board mark, which is lower. So, you know, as we look at what we're doing to help ensure that this enhances, anything that you can share, and I know we're talking, you know, we're doing some things at the high school level, but certainly those earlier stages as well are extremely important.
And, you know, we've talked about our Equal Opportunity Schools partnership and how the research shows us that, you know, even taking one course at a higher level helps prepare you better for college and career. And so we've spent some time and learned a lot from what the Equal Opportunity Schools shared with us, as well as the experiences our high school students, staff, and administrators have had with this first year of looking at things and really looking at individual students and looking to make recommendations for those students and move them ahead. So taking that information now and working with the middle school the elementary to look at providing those opportunities at an earlier stage is what our next step is. One of the great benefits in listening to the high school principals and teachers is just the mindset of opening things up and looking at things differently. And I think that's what we need to carry into our middle schools as well as our elementary. You know, we've talked before also about the opportunity gap and looking at our preschoolers who are at risk from designated low-income families and trying to provide a free preschool for them to get them a good quality education and get them ready for that kindergarten age. We've seen some good results there, but we've got a lot of kids that are past preschool. And so we have, you know, our focus is really looking at that opportunity gap and providing more students with a more rigorous coursework, looking at our accelerated math, our Project Arrow, things like that, and opening some of those doors. And then the other piece is really that personalized learning, is looking at each individual student, what are their interests as well as what drives them, and then looking at where they are in their academic and working to personalize their learning to help them, each individual student, to grow. So part of that that we're using some Title I funds for is that our schools that have been designated Title I due to their free and reduced lunch population is we have a wonderful math digital resource that does just that. It looks at the standards, it assesses where students are, teachers can assign it, and it helps them to move forward at their own pace with a more engaging presentation of some of those items that partners with what the teacher is presenting. So it supports those things too.
That's you.
to really personalize that learning and help a student grow, each individual student grow from where they start.
Well, I'm really happy, and I know that you guys shared earlier the work that we're doing at the preschool level, you know, and really in trying to enhance the opportunities on that low-income level, which is extremely important. I just want to ensure that, you know, once they get past that preschool level and they're in the, you know, the first to second to third, fourth grade, that we are continuing to put resources, because those years are so crucial. Obviously, you know that, but
we collected data last year on some of our initial preschoolers from when we first started having Title I preschool, and out of the students that stayed with us, so that they were in our kindergarten and first grade, over 67% of them who were determined at risk in order to be in preschool were no longer at risk in the area of math, and over 82%, I believe, in the area of reading, who were determined at risk in order to qualify for that Title I preschool, were no longer at risk when they started kindergarten or first grade. But we are going to continue to track over time to see what the impact has been once they get to third grade and to fourth grade, and continue to move so that we can make adjustments. We added this year another preschool, and we've, I think we talked about this before, we've actually moved the preschools to Title I buildings. So it helps those students become acclimated to their school community right off the bat and helps us to find students. So that is a drive for us, but we do understand that students are past preschool and we need to do something now.
I think I have a question. If I recall, our students can fall into more than just one of these categories.
Yes.
So, you know, when you dig down to that student level, is there any particular area you focus on, or is it just what are their needs?
Are you talking about an individual student, or are you talking about if a student is designated free and reduced lunch as well as has an IEP and things like that? You know, we do dig into the data, and that's where the school team is crucial in getting to know the student and to find out what the impact is. You know, academic at risk is academic at risk, and we need to put some things into place for that student, whether it's providing more opportunities, maybe it's an opportunity gap they don't, you know, the Chromebooks that the board has been providing is a great leveling of the playing field. So we have, you know, all of our students by the end of next year from 2nd to 12th grade will have a Chromebook so that we can provide some of those resources that way. But really, when you look at the categories here, it goes down to the student to find out what are the needs of that individual student and providing that for them. At our level, at the district level, we look at groups of students to look at our curriculum, to look at our resources, and to look at what types of professional learning we need to provide for our administrators and students in order to support that, as well as to support their diving deeper into looking at an individual student.
So this SAT data represents one point in time. It's even more useful to be able to look at growth over time. These graphs represent our current sophomores and growth from their 8th grade PSAT to the 9th grade PSAT. And again, what these demonstrate is that, first of all, we are seeing strong growth from all students. So every single group, we're seeing significant increases in achievement between 8th and 9th grade, these 2 points in time. But we are still seeing those significant differences in achievement, and those differences are persisting over this time period. Looking further back earlier, to earlier grades, this graph represents last year's fall to spring growth for each grade level on Ames Web Reading. And it paints a similar picture that we are seeing good, solid growth out of all groups of students, but we're seeing differences in achievement that persist over time.
So
and when we look back even earlier to our kindergarten and first grade assessments, what we're seeing is the same thing, that students are entering with that gap, and although everyone is growing, the gap is persisting.
So how do we give additional, is it a matter of giving additional resources to those groups that are on the bottom in order to
Well, obviously
shrink the gap?
The earlier, the better. You know, if we can close it kindergarten, first and second grade level, and then maintain growth or even accelerate growth as we move forward, that would be wonderful. We haven't been able to do that yet, but that's our focus. Our focus is to really look at that early piece, but also to take a look at, you know, in order to close that gap, we need things to move faster. So we need to look at our efforts and look at more concentrated efforts as well as a more systemic approach in order to do that. So we've got some things that we see that are supporting students. We need to decide to do them more often or more widespread, or those types of, we need to move. We need to move a little faster.
Kathy, two things. One, bouncing off of what Lori remarked, having an opportunity to segment and look at things, you know, two different ways. The information regarding the difference between high or non-low income African American scores, low income, you know, same with, you know, Hispanic. Looking at that difference because there was a differential there, which points to Mark's comment regarding the need for resources. One of I sat in at the PDAC meeting last week, and one of the young ladies happened to remark, she said, I found that it wasn't that I was so much more intelligent than other students, it was that my family had the resources to help me when I had need in order that I could make sure that I, you know, did well in AP classes or whatever. So that just kind of points to the fact that students come in, they may not have had some of those other resources at an earlier age, and it's not the reflective of the ability. So to Mike's point, resources that could be provided, that we could, in creative ways that we could look at an earlier point in time, could be really important.
The resources are extremely important, and really looking at even our kindergarten and first grade curriculum and meeting those needs there. I think it's also about advocacy And, you know, I think I was at PDEC, shout out to PDEC last week. It was a great meeting that had a lot of really good information. And, you know, when you talked with some of those students, their parents wanted them included in some of that advanced coursework. And sometimes parents want that, sometimes parents ask for that, sometimes they take a school recommendation and things like that. And I think that's one of the great pluses that we've seen from Equal Opportunity Schools is it has helped us to not just say this student would benefit from this, but why. It has taught us what some of those other indicators can be aside from one test score. So that's the information that we're going to look at with our other levels is, you know, does this student work really hard at what they try to do? They have perseverance, grit, those kinds of things. And those are types of characteristics that we would see that they would benefit from more advanced coursework. So I think it's two things. I think it is providing resource, but I also think it's part of that resource is an advocacy piece for students.
But we are beginning to take away the roadblocks from the entrance ramps for some of this and being a little bit more liberal and giving people opportunity in order to participate.
To have more discussions about students. So it's not just if if the cut score is 30 and you scored a 31, you're in. If you scored a 29, you're not. It's more about that range of scores is an indicator of who might be successful, but then we look at parents, teachers, students' performance, grades, activities, things like that to look at what would be more of an indicator. So it's more about having a discussion about a student to see if they would benefit than just this is the score and that's where you are.
Okay.
It takes time to make sure that that's what we're looking at. It takes a lot of mindset and to look at a lot of different approaches to get that done.
I have a question about, if we were talking about the resources and providing them, and you were talking about a more systematic approach to it, identifying earlier. I just, are we happy with our approach to identifying? Is it, because we're looking at trying to close a gap, so when are we applying more resources to the students who are lower, and then, as the students improve, dropping resources? Or do we continue to provide the resources until they are at a level we want? And I'm just thinking, like, there's so many different cutoffs sometimes about when a student needs a resource and when a student doesn't need a resource. Are we looking at that, like playing with those kind of things too?
Well, that's part of what, when you look at, and I'll talk a little bit about the graphic, but when you look at our work with district management group, it's part of what we've talked about is what is a struggling student and what do we provide for struggling students. So that's part of what we're doing with that group is really looking at how do we identify it and then what do we do about it and how do we know when they don't need the resources any longer. Mm-hmm. So when you know we're not happy, with it, okay. We're constantly talking, working, adjusting. And I think that's one reason why we asked the board to support the district management group, because that's one area where we knew we needed support in order to make the work a little bit better and make things a little bit better for students and for teachers. So, that's part of what we're looking at because we aren't happy with it and we're going to make some adjustments. The graphic that you see is we talked about scores or indicators, but we need to dig deeper and look at things. And when we do dig deeper, we've identified 4 areas that we have a plan written for. So and the 4 plans, the curriculum instruction implementation plan, you've seen our equity implementation plan, the Every Student Succeeds Act. We talked a little bit about that, where we had that within that act are the Title I and Title II grants, which look at supporting students of poverty, as well as homeless students. And then supporting struggling students, we are just developing that plan based on our work we've been doing with District Management Group. But the reason we came with this visual is because all of these things are interconnected and overlap. but they're all, the circle around them is our mission statement, is to inspire all students. So we're really looking at these plans in order to support all students, close the gap, and help all students to, as we talk about #Future Ready, to be ready for the future. We'll go into these a little bit more in depth at a future board meeting, but just to highlight a few things, and as you said, we do need a systemic approach in order to close that gap and to help all students. And so we think that these plans will help us be more systemic with that. And our curriculum and instruction implementation plan, the work of that is really looking at the way we deliver instruction. We've talked a lot about how instruction has changed over time. It's not just a teacher in front and students listening, but looking at that personalized learning approach and how to meet students where they are, how to engage them in their learning and those types of things, as well as looking at data. What data do we have to drive those instructional practices? We found from our data that we need to go back and take a look at balanced literacy. We need to make sure that we're really focused on that reading piece as well. The Every Student Succeeds Act, I talked to you a little bit about that. That's really looking at supporting and providing resources, as Mr. Razek talked about, as well as professional learning for teachers and for students students that are at risk due to poverty, as well as who may be homeless. The equity implementation plan we talked with you about last year. We will update you on that, but the focus of that work is the cultural proficiency training, which I think Yvette has almost made it to every building, and all of the groups looking at that, but some standardized professional learning that every teacher, every staff member within the district has that same information and has that same learning, as well as, I know Doug talked to you before about hiring practices within that and expanding opportunities for students. And then the last one we just talked about was the supporting struggling students, and I gave you the highlight of that. But we felt like we had these plans working, and for us, we needed to show how they connect and how they overlap in order to help achieve that mission. One of the things that we've talked about recently with administrators as well as teachers is the social emotional learning component, which is woven in there. In fact, I had a principal say it needs to sit right in the middle of your graphic, and so we just recently had signed a partnership with CASEL, which is an advocacy group, as well as the DuPage ROE, to look at a systemic approach to our social emotional learning and how we implement that as well. Any questions about the graphic? As I said, it's a little teaser at the upcoming meeting. We'll go more in depth about each one of those plans and provide those to the board. This slide is a reminder. We talked to you before about, the report card changed over time, and now it's going to change again next year due to ESSA accountability. Again, we spoke with you about the indicators that will be on the report card. We're not sure, we haven't heard from the state yet how it will be displayed, and we're still waiting to hear how these indicators will be measured. Obviously, we know Park, but some of those others, we haven't seen that yet. And then just one more reminder that...
Kathy, can I just mention that on this one, notice that the proficiency scores that we've all been talking about are going to have less of a score, and that the growth measure is going to take a greater percentage, and that's going to be a big change.
So here's my question with this. We're going to start doing this next year.
Well, the scores from this year will be reported on next year's report card.
Okay, so will the achievement gap look different? Because one of the comments that people made is about the systemic racism.
Well,
and for me, if you use one test measure, and that's what we've used, one, now we have 10. This is going to give us a better indicator of how systemic our issue is, no?
I think it is, but I also think that, the chart that we shared, this one, I'm just going to speak for Charles because I have a lot of confidence in him. He can always share this with us. He'll always have our scores, our average scores, and he can always disaggregate the data, right? Yes. So we can continue to look at it in the same fashion
No,
and
I
to
wanna
measure
look-
our growth.
Yeah,
But we can also, we don't know exactly how the state is going to look at it, but we will have indicators as well as from other school districts as well as, and it depends on the indicator, how you can disaggregate that data as well.
But multiple measures should be much more indicative than just one measure, correct? Or am I missing the boat somewhere?
You know, I think with the data, go ahead.
No, multiple measures, I mean, and that's the point of this, is that, you know, we're no longer just this one achievement measure, and that's the be-all and end-all that tells us how well a school or district is doing. So yes, the multiple measures is definitely a step in the right direction. I think what we're unsure of right now is how what it's going to look like, how it's going to translate. So the actual measure they're going to use, that we don't know. What percentage you have to hit to get this kind of designation, those are all things that are unknown at this point.
So, yeah, we're going to be able to say, here's a more well-rounded student. But the fact of the matter is, there's still a standardized test. And there always will be. And I hate standardized tests, but it's something we have to do, and the state tells us we have to do it. I hate that we have to measure students based on an ethnic or racial or economic or needs basis, but the state tells us we have to do it. Having said that, I'm glad, because this board, even before I was on board, since 2009, this board has dug down into the different groups that we measure, and this board has set goals. This board has had significant gains. But here's the problem. I keep going back to this, is there's still a gap. And will there always be a gap? Maybe. There might always be a gap. Whether it's low income, whether it's African American, whether it's Hispanic, whatever it is. How do we close that? And something Ms. Barnes said when she was up here is, you know, and I'm going to put this together in a different way, is we need to meet the students where they are. And we have this wonderful thing now called technology. And we have software programs that will measure what students' strengths and weaknesses are. So I challenge us as a district, us as a board, us as an administration, us as schools and teachers to really start to put into place now this individualized instruction to help the students individually. Because I think when we start doing that and finding better ways of doing that with software programs, we're going to start to see a closing of those gaps. You know, because I think of schools like Urban Prep. They're all African American, they're all low income, and yet 99% of them are going to college. You know, so there's got to be a way, whether it's attitude, whether it's encouragement, whether it's that individualized instruction, there's got to be something that we can be doing better. And I think we're taking great steps, don't get me wrong. But, you know, I would like to see us get better at this.
Just quickly, the multiple measures, I think that's great, but the bottom line is, as students are trying to get into school, the SAT is a measure that we need to ensure we help that students are getting better on, and all urban prep students aren't.
Right.
Low income, just so you know. But
Oh, no, they
that's
aren't?
okay.
Okay.
No. But that's.
We still have to work. It doesn't matter how we measure it or how we look at it. We still have work to do with each of those individual students to get them over that, to get them to that, to where they want to be, and to get them over the line.
Well, is there things we can look at, like, because I was looking at the data thing that Jay and the administration put together. You know, I saw one high school that has a significantly higher low income and Hispanic population than us, and they've done pretty good of keeping almost even with us as far as test scores. We're still doing better than them, but you know, I was looking at some other districts too, and I'm like, there's some interesting things here, you know, and I know we've seen some closing of gaps, at Neuqua, you know, while they have far less African-American students in Metea or Waubonsie, they've done some really good things there. And I know they've shared ideas, and Lewis has worked with the principals to put some of those things in place. But, you know, I'm just even thinking outside of our district too, like, is there some interesting things we can find out and discover?
Well, at the PDAC meeting the other night, they shared a wonderful video about a school district close to Milwaukee. And, you know, they measure the gap in a different way. They measure it by graduation rate. But, you know, within that, there were ideas of what they felt supported and helped students to do that. And so, you know, we definitely look at that and take that information. You know, it was similar to some of the approaches we've had, but if the tweaks of it and those kinds of things, we're always looking for more information and continue talking to other districts as well across the nation.
Well, and while we like to see those, you know, scores go up, and we want to make sure that our students are achieving, you know, those, certain SAT scores and College Board and being college ready, career ready, it is encouraging to know that, you know, the colleges now are not looking at just those scores. They're looking at, you know, the rigor that that student has been involved in. They're looking at their extracurricular. They're asking, you know, tell us if there's anything that has affected your academic career. And they're looking at the progress. You know, they're looking at growth. So, you know, it's not just that one score anymore. That one score is not going to prohibit you necessarily from being in that school that you want to be into. You know, you got to show them that you're that student that they want. And I think, like I said, we can't lose sight of getting our kids to, you know, those scores and making sure that that gap is closed. And I think with the equal opportunity schools, you know, again, if they can show that they've taken one AP class, 2 AP, whatever, I think that's going to help them as well, as far as being, you know, looking at those colleges and being college ready. So I think we're on the right track. Just got to keep going.
And the other reminder is the summative designations that our schools will receive based on this year's data. We talked about that at the workshop, but this will also be on next year's school and district report card. And then wanted to give a little commercial, and I thank our public comment for the same thing. This is a wonderful tool that Janet Bulio and Greg Gibson have developed that really helps us to look at suburban unit districts and see the achievement in comparison to where we are. You can put 2 different variables there and look at it that way. It's give yourself some time because it's so interesting. You could spend a lot of time looking at that. So that's been very helpful for us too, to take a look at that data in a different way.
Can I ask one question on ESSA? What is going to be considered a underperforming subgroup? Is that going to be lower than state average? Have they defined that yet, of what that is going to be defined as?
I don't have a clear definition.
Okay, I was just curious because I'm looking at it and I'm like, okay, how's that measured?
We haven't gotten any information.
Yeah, I think the shift for me in this, when they look at the designations, is more about comparisons to other schools. I think they're looking at what are high-performing schools and how can high-performing schools, what can we learn from them in order to support schools that are in the lowest performing school category or the underperforming. So I think it's in comparison to others.
But there was an article that Mike referenced last school board meeting, or a couple school board meetings ago, that I read too. It was like Massachusetts has been implementing these tiers for a couple of years now, and there's like 3 schools in the whole state of Massachusetts, which is a great state for education. 3 schools were in tier 1. I mean, yeah.
We'll see.
My only, I'm looking forward to hearing from our different ways of looking at everything. But what I look at this from a board perspective is we want to know what is needed in order to make this happen. So, I see sometimes resources are given because these kids are the only ones we can serve because we don't have enough resources to serve all the kids that need support. So I don't want to be one of those districts. I don't think our board wants to be one of those districts, and I think, we need to hear the honest truth of what's needed when we get all the information back from you guys. So, thank you.
2 points I'd like to make. One is I think we need to revisit our district goals. District Goal 1, it talks about we need to improve park. 75% it needs to be over. Our SAT score needs to be 1220. And we need to close the achievement gap by 2 to 5%. We should take another look at that now that we got some more data. And the second thing is our resource discussion. We measure the achievement gap, but then we're restricted in our ability to allocate resources on the basis of race. The law doesn't allow that. U.S. has a bad history of doing that. So we do it by other means, by proxies, by low income, and by other blunt tools that when maybe a scalpel is necessary. So if we are trying to close the achievement gap, and then we focus on allocating resources to things like lowering class sizes as a tool to do that, and that's going to help improve the benefits of everybody in the class, not just a certain population. You've allocated the resources in an effort to close the achievement gap in a way that is not solely based on race, but ends up improving everybody. We go back to that slide that you showed, where the scores of everybody increased, but the gap increased. And so you can see how it's a little bit more complex. So I think what's important from my perspective is that we see growth. You want to see the gap decrease, but with the restraints on our ability to allocate resources, we're going to keep using these blunt tools. And yes, you hit your target, but you're going to have the unintended consequence of hitting a lot of others, unintended or not. And you're constantly going to be chasing your tail. So I think if we see growth, that's more important to me. If we talk about where those allocation of resources should be allocated, whether it's class size or this and that, those methods are important. But I think we all have to appreciate the constraints we're under. We measure one thing, try to correct it, but we got a hand behind our back in trying to do that.
Justin, the only thing that I would say is there, when we look at federal grants and provisions, there's a reason why, Title I funds are provided.
Sure.
And so making sure that we, take advantage of things like that and other grants that are specifically designated, if possible, to address those areas. And so Title I is provided to ensure or to help those persons or schools that don't have the same resources as other schools. So those are, potentially places where we can look, and I know we do a very good job of that at many of our elementary schools. The other thing that I did want to ask is as you guys come back and continue to provide us more in-depth information, it would be great to be sure that we understand what your specific goals are, as far as surrounding everything, the specific goals regarding the achievement gap or whatever the quantitative data that you're attaching, to see where we're going to reach or what our goal should be within what period of time and that type of thing. And of course, that may fluctuate, but it would be
some benchmarks.
Exactly. Thanks.
We didn't do district goals with that, did we?
Anything else? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. We now have my update, Board of Education update. Susan, would you like to give an impassioned plea, or would you like me to do that about tomorrow?
I can give an impassioned plea.
There you go.
Please. We hope that we will see many of our District 204 parents, teachers, community members, business persons, those that had children within the district previously and whose children have now graduated. Any community member, we desperately want to have your input, be part of the conversation as the district looks to determine directions and understand just what's really important and the priorities that we need to be focused on. We look forward to hearing a state of the district from our Superintendent Sullivan tomorrow evening, and I think it'll be extremely enlightening. People will learn quite a bit of things that our district, great things that our district is doing, some of the things that our district has taken on to overcome in light of some of the financial challenges that we faced, and it'll be a great information session. So very important, and we plead for people to be a part of this important time within our district.
And the only thing I would like to add to that is two things. One, you're just not going to be listening. You're going to be participating and assisting us and trying, this is I would like to say this is a good and great board. We want to become better, and we want to listen to our constituencies so we do the right thing. So there's going to be plenty of opportunity for you to participate, and eventually in July for us to get that report and listen to what our community wants. And that's tomorrow at 7 p.m. at Still Middle School. Other things. Dr. Sullivan mentioned this, but I think on behalf of the entire board, we want to extend a special thank you to all our schools who honored our veterans last Thursday and Friday. Many board members attended a lot of the ceremonies, and as she said, they were inspirational. And I think they really taught our students and made them aware of a spirit of service, which I think is a good thing to do. Instead of taking the day off, maybe doing that activity is probably far more meaningful. The last LEN meeting was held on November 3rd. Several DuPage legislators were present. Some of our superintendents provided a presentation on the topic of dual credit, both the benefits and the continued challenges of providing dual credit in our community and state were shared. A copy of that PowerPoint presentation is included in your folder tonight, so you can look at that and kind of review it, and you'll get an overview. The last IPEF meeting focused on the results, of course, on Team IPF. Again, over 355 runners participated in the half marathon. 487 students ran in the student kids marathon. They actually raised $178,000, returning over $73,000 back to their schools. So what a great community event. And again, as evidenced by our action tonight, the entire Board of Education will be participating in the Illinois School Board Convention this weekend. For people out there, this convention is one of our few opportunities, being a volunteer board, for professional development training. And those of us who have been on the board for a while have found it a worthwhile activity that makes us better board members. So this weekend we'll be there. And that's it. Need a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Need your exit slips, please.